Good afternoon to everyone here at the CMA's headquarters in Canary Wharf, London, and to those joining us online. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the CMA Data Technology and Analytics Conference 2022. This is the first event because the CMA has decided we will be hosting this every 2 years, so it's a great pleasure to have you here at our inaugural event. My name's Stefan Hunt. I'm the Chief Data and Technology Insight Officer at the CMA. That means I built and I lead our data and technology teams. So this is the first event, and what we're trying to do is make sure, obviously we're trying to focus on data and technology, but what we're also trying to do is make sure that we're bringing in new speakers who the competition and consumer protection community does not ordinarily hear from, to try and kind of enrich the understanding and the conversations that we have. I'd like to specifically welcome those online. We know we've got some people who are joining us from the East Coast of the US, right through to Australia, so welcome to you all. So there's two things that we're trying to do over the next day and a half. The first is really trying to focus on understanding new and evolving challenges in the technology industry and digital markets. And the second thing that we're trying to focus on is what agencies themselves need to do to develop technical capabilities and expertise. On the second of these topics, we published a paper yesterday that I wrote on the technology-led transformation of competition and consumer agencies. And what we're going to be doing over the next day and a half, we're going to, just after this short welcome, we're going to be joined by Bill Kovacic. And Bill is going to, I'll introduce Bill in a second. Bill is going to do a keynote, and that's going to lead into a panel from our esteemed heads of agencies. So we're very lucky to be joined by Olivier, Guersent, Benoît, Cœuré, and obviously Andrea Coscelli from the CMA, all in the room. And we're also going to be joined virtually by Lina and Gina Cass-Gottlieb as well. And so they're going to give an overview for what we're going to be doing over the next day and a half. Then there's two sides to the conference. So the first side is looking at the new and evolving challenges. And we've got a keynote from Tim Wu after the heads of agencies panels, and that's going to be there's going to be a panel focusing on privacy and the future of the internet. Then tomorrow afternoon, we've got a keynote from Benedict Evans, where he's going to be thinking about what are the trends and technologies that agencies need to understand for the future. That's going to be followed by a panel on the same topic, and then we're going to have the final panel focusing on interoperability. Now, there's the second side of the conference as well, which is really trying to focus on agencies. We're going to kick that off later today through, I'm going to give a presentation on the paper that I just mentioned, and then I'm going to be joined by, I'm very happy to say, by colleagues from 6 different agencies who are chief data officers or equivalents, and we're going to have a broad conversation about what agencies are doing globally. Tomorrow morning, we have a series of 4 presentations from 4 different agencies going into more depth on specific things that agencies have been doing in this space. And then at the end of the conference, we've got a keynote from Susan Athey, and then we have a variety of individuals mostly outside of the competition community, are going to help us think about where can and should the agencies be going in the future. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Bill Kovacic. Bill is a law professor at George Washington University in the US. He's also had many positions at the Federal Trade Commission. In particular, he was chair of the Federal Trade Commission from 2008 and 2009. He was also a non-executive director at the CMA for many years, finishing his tenure just recently. The vast majority of you will be aware of Bill already, so it's my great pleasure to welcome Bill to the stage. And I'm sure he's just coming.
Sound okay? Okay, great, thank you.
I'm assuming there's a mic problem, that's what I think it is. Brilliant.
I was negotiating the fee. There's a skill to doing the hold-up in just the right way. pre-contractual opportunities and post-contractual reneging, all in the same process. Stefan, I'm delighted to be here today. I'm so thrilled to be back in an agency I admire so much and has played such a leadership role in the new incarnation and in events like today. So thank you. And thank you to the whole team for the chance to be here. I want to talk about two perennial issues that confront competition authorities. One of them is how much to invest in building capability and what kind of capability is worth investing in. The question of investment versus consumption in the form of current matters is a difficult one because of the urgency that agencies face every day of the week to produce more cases, to have a higher rate of output. And when you start talking about investment that has a longer term effect and may not provide immediate results, you receive a quizzical look that says, do you really understand how we get rated, how we're evaluated? And it squeezes out an understanding of where good programs come from and the role that investment plays in enabling you to do good programs in the future. To get us started today, I want to give some reasons for making that investment. To have, as part of the routine effort of agency decision-making, an investment in what might be called capital goods, capital features that enable agencies to do a good job in the future. And the focal point of my comments is on what might be called big antitrust and consumer protection data. We are so accustomed to hearing about private enterprises and the great benefit they derive from collecting data and looking at data sets. How it's the new oil, the new input, the new oxygen, the elemental characteristic that enables them to compete. I'd suggest to you that agencies have big data too. And the older you are as an agency, the more data you've collected. And it's the ability to use your own information effectively and reflect upon your own experience to collect a bit more data from the outside and to finish today to work with colleagues in other institutions that puts you in a position to do a better job. I'm going to use some examples. Some of these are happy, some of these are sad. They mostly come from my own experience. Not in this agency, this is a great agency, but in other agencies where the experience has been somewhat more mixed, where the effort to make good policy has not always exploited the possibilities that are built into a base of experience that's enormously informative. And a basic intuition of the whole talk is that when you look at the literature about management, about private firms, about public administration, how do they improve? They learn. They learn over time by reflecting on what they've done before. They learn about things that have worked, and they grow from studying carefully things that have not. So, why care about the investment in building better analytical capability? Much in the way that the CMA has done in building the data team that Stefan heads. First, if you have good analytics, you can do a better diagnosis of observed behavior. You can understand better what you're looking at. And what might seem to be a collection of random dots, if you stare at it too closely, if you step back, no, that's a haystack. It's the Museum d'Orsay. It's not just a bunch of dots on a canvas. And you get a better idea of what it means. Let me give you a sad example. It involves the global financial crisis, and I'm going to tell you about the greatest professional regret of my lifetime and my experience at the FTC. We had not all of the mortgage lending responsibility. We had oversight for mortgage lenders who were not banks. So we saw part of what was going on in the mortgage lending business. And we ran a lot of cases involving fraud, misrepresentation to borrowers. And we brought dozens of cases dealing with this kind of conduct. But we noticed, at least in an idiosyncratic way, that lots of the people who were getting loans had no evident capacity to pay for them. We saw the famous ninja loans before other people did. No income, no job. I remember one loan form that I saw when I was in the general counsel's office that basically said, how much money would you like to earn next year? Not how much money are you making right now? And when we'd sit down with meetings with the other financial services regulators, we would say, There's a peculiar pattern going on that we're noticing in the course of doing fraud cases, and it seems as though many of the people who are doing the borrowing are never going to be able to pay these loans. Impossible. And this only works if housing prices keep going up and the lenders can flip the houses back over, take whatever equity is there and walk away with it. Now, the pros in the financial services business, like the Federal Reserve said, nice Federal Trade Commission, kid, why don't you go sit down back over the children? We're the pros. Now, you've got a few of these impressions. That's interesting. But what we didn't have is a process for taking the whole database, extracting all of the instances in which we saw that there was no way on earth that people could pay for the loans, so that we had a data set that we could put in front of the banking officials and say, look at this. What happens if housing prices flatten out or, God forbid, dip? We will be on the edge of a calamity if that happens. We didn't have that database that systematically enabled us to put it right in front of them. Now, we might have been waved off anyway and told to sit with the children instead of the pros in the bank regulatory business. And I don't know how hard we would have pulled the emergency cord and said, this is breaking down, and there is an abyss, and we're going full speed ahead towards it. But we would have been in a much better position going to the other regulators if we'd looked at our experience base, assembled the full volume of loans that we knew of, where you had these fictitious hopes and wishes about income, and said, this is a disaster in process. Can't tell you when it will happen, but it's going to happen. Better analytics, better data collection would have put us in a position to do a much better job. And yes, if we'd studied it, we would have thought immediately by 2003, 2004, 2005, this is a moment to do a market study. This is a moment to do a market study that looks at what's going on in this sector. How pervasive are these patterns? Could we have avoided the meltdown at the FTC? Could we at the FTC have avoided the meltdown? I don't know. Counterfactuals in life are treacherous, aren't they? You don't get to just pick out one event, hold everything else constant, and say how much better it would have been. It's not like that. But it gnaws at me on a regular basis. What would have happened if we'd had a better picture and a better set of information about what's going on, so that our concerns would not have been brushed off as idiosyncratic, impressionistic observations about what was happening in the sector? Hard, systematic data would have made a big difference, I'd like to think. So, data puts you in a position to understand much better what you're looking at and to derive important policy prescriptions. Second thing it does, it enables you to cope with technological and commercial dynamism. Now, are we living in an era where the rate of change is unprecedented? No. Go back 100 or so years. Go back to the people living 1900 to 1920. What were they looking at? Telephone, airplane, moving pictures, talking pictures. Revolutions in steam and in rail transportation, steamships across the board. It was no less bewildering. I would assert that the absolute and relative rate of change today is greater. So we've seen this movie before, but where have competition authorities and consumer authorities been habitually struggling to catch up, to understand what's going on, to do an appropriate diagnosis, and to formulate appropriate forms of intervention? And the complaint about the system is that, especially in technologically sophisticated fields, the agencies don't know what they're looking at. This is a complaint that's made in the course of formulating policy, speaking to legislators, and speaking to courts. That you're habitually looking at yesterday's problem, and you become pretty good at diagnosing what was a problem 5 years ago, but not so good about interpreting what's going on now. How do you cope with the dynamism? Why is it important? Another painful story. Partly happy, partly sad. It's a measure that the FTC adopted to limit the use of unsolicited telephone calls to the home under a rule that became known as the do not call rule. For about 10 years, it worked well. But what was the blind spot? We didn't do rigorous stress testing with technologists to see how the industry would adapt. And what's the sobering story, whether you're talking about the DMA, the DMU, or something else where you have prescriptions, is how are firms going to adapt to them? You think they're going to surrender and say, I quit? That they won't adapt? One possibility is they'll adapt in a rapid and significant way. Have you anticipated the adaptation when you write a decree in a merger case or in a conduct case? What you can be sure of is they're not going to raise their hands and surrender and give up. That there will be a process of adaptation, and even if it's not a conscious process of evasion, the technology will push in directions that you can't even imagine, perhaps immediately. For the do not call rule, we did a good job of dealing with the existing technology. What was the blind spot? We did not have a team of technologists inside or consulting outside who took our rule and were basically told, how could this fall apart in 5 years or 10 years? It worked pretty well for a decade. But we didn't see what was going to happen with robocalling. We didn't have the technologists working on the project to say, here's what's coming at you later on. Here are the defenses you have to build in order to deal with it. A rule that worked really well for 10 years. Lesson for the broader community is that if you don't have that expertise in the house, and yes, you can contract out for some of it, but if you don't have the organic capability inside to understand what external consultants are telling you, you're not necessarily a lot better off. But in any process that involves rapid technological change and commercial changes that go with it, you have to have a process and the capacity to ask, if we take this measure, what will be the corresponding adjustments that take place in the business community? And the further lesson was the importance of having an ongoing consultation. One thing I like about the Privacy Sandbox is that there is a mechanism built into the remedial scheme to ask on an ongoing basis, is it doing what we thought? Is it doing what we thought? And talking to outside parties and posing the same question to them. And it's not enough to do that every 5 or 10 years, to have the periodic conference that looks ahead at competition in the next century, technology in the next decade. We did those very well at the FTC. We had one in particular in the 1990s. It was a breakthrough public consultation. And we asked all the wise people on earth to come and talk to us. A tip about planning programs, if you like academics to come and speak with you, call them up and say, I know your time is very limited, but you are so smart. Would you please come and give us a minute? They'd say, I am very busy. I don't know if I can do it. How about tomorrow morning? They'll show up right away. Well, we brought all of these wise people, and they were on target with a number of things. But in my pocket, I have one thing that they missed completely. Storage. This is a thumb drive. Everybody was talking about floppy disks or hard disks, 3 inches by 5. They didn't catch this. And least of all, did they catch what could be out there climatologically called a cloud. Nobody saw that coming. It wasn't enough to have that exercise now and then. That's got to be an ongoing process where you talk to people in the technology field on a regular basis and go to their conferences where sometimes they're talking about science fiction. But how fascinating it is to see that the science fiction becomes truth much faster than you think. And to do that well, you've got to have that capacity inside the house too. You have to have the people who can guide that process. It has to be a routine, ongoing process, because I think we've learned in enforcement in this field, it's never over. It doesn't end. It's an iterative, continuing process. Another lesson is the benefit of detection. This is a happier story. My colleagues here from the Department of Justice know this history better than I do. But I'm struck at how the reflection on the early variants of the DOJ leniency program produced a major rethink about how leniency could work. The older version of leniency basically said, you tell us everything you know and we'll do something good for you. Something, not everything. Something, some dispensation, some, not complete. But you tell us everything you know. Part of what DOJ saw in reflecting on the experience was that that wasn't eliciting a large volume of traffic in the door. And the rethink, drawing on some theory involving game theory, drawing upon actual experience, a new leader, Ann Bingaman, who was willing to do a bold new thing, said it's only going to work if you provide a much better prize for being first. And they did it. What's the great benefit? It revolutionized our field. You can make an argument that no single policy intervention, innovation by a public competition agency has done more to change our lives and improve our effectiveness than what Anne Bingaman did roughly 30 years ago in establishing the new leniency regime. In the world of antitrust statuary, she ought to be on a plinth because of what she did and made that happen. That was a shrewd reflection on past experience and the shrewd formulation of a new policy experiment whose success was hardly guaranteed at the time it started. And I think what we're seeing in lots of interesting research now about cartels is that if you look at your full experience with cartels and you study them carefully to see how they operate, how they're formed, if the only thing they do is meet in a restaurant to say, let's raise prices, they deserve to be punished, if only because of their stupidity. That's only the starting point. That doesn't do the job. There's so many other things they have to do, and studying carefully what they do to make it work identifies behaviors that you want to look for. And indeed, to use artificial intelligence, other screening mechanisms, as a supplement to other enforcement tools to detect misconduct. And what I think is quite interesting in looking at experience is much of what they do to make it work involves using exclusionary practices that are the favorites of dominant firms, like exclusive dealing, to take one choice. It helps you build presumptions that you might build into the enforcement of Section 2 of the Sherman Act, or other single firm conduct effects. What it does is it gives you the ability, a sense of what to look for. But if you look at that experience in a systematic way, it gives you a lot of clues about what's coming up next. A couple last thoughts about why this helps. If you approach courts with a better base of knowledge about what you've done, it improves your ability to gain deference. My judgment about courts is that they defer to you when they think you're right. The mechanical formula otherwise are meaningless. If they think you've persuaded them, then they defer, they recite the wonderful language. But they want to see your work first. And part of the work you want to show them is, we've got data. We've done the analytics. We are an expert institution. We're not just basing our views on impressions. We have an element of science and empirical work. You can trust us. Now that's a basis for gaining deference, so it helps in the litigation process. And the last main thing I'll mention is that it helps with remedies. Especially the older the agency is, the body of remedial experience it has grows. How many people are familiar with that within their own agencies? Do they know what they've done? You know, one of the main complaints that's been made so often about competition and policy in the modern era is we missed innovation. We ignored it. We were only concerned about price. We slap ourselves on the forehead and said, my God, how could we have missed innovation? What a surprise. If that were true, that would be a searing indictment of competition policy. Well, it didn't happen. When I look at the experience, for example, with aerospace and defense, a body of about 60 transactions that the two US agencies have looked at a period going back to the 1970s, every single theory of liability was predicated on significantly or exclusively innovation-related effects. And a lot of the remedies had innovation-related solutions built in. Well, in thinking today about what we should do, what does that tell us? What did we learn about how to assess innovation-related effects? And what kinds of remedies put agencies in a better position to pick a good remedy in the future to decide when to intervene? There's so much there from past experience that provides a basis for understanding what to do next. But you can't do it if you don't have a good catalog of your previous cases, if you don't retain some knowledge about what you did. And yes, an internal data and analytics scheme can help you interpret those results and decide what to look at. I've talked in general about reasons to build this capability. A concluding thought about how to make sure the capability works well. I've been assuming that capability building effort is taking place inside of a single agency. imagine what you would do if you joined up the knowledge base accumulated across a lot of agencies over time. One of my co-authors is a real doctor and a lawyer. He is a doctor. And he tells me that in healthcare, a great source of the revolution in healthcare, improvements in healthcare, came from joining up data about treatment, diagnosis, surgical technique across a lot of hospitals. So that instead of looking at the experience of a single cardiology department, you were looking at hundreds. Hundreds that gave you more observations that you systematically examined. And that put any one cardiology team at one hospital in a much better position to do good medicine. So when we talk about the cliche, the slogan about how important cooperation is, and it is, sure, yes, 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 yes. I'd like a dollar, a pound, or a euro for every time I've heard about it. It's really good. Suppose it were genuine in this sense, that you were able to assemble and bring to bear all of that big antitrust data, all the experience, and pull it as a way of thinking about what to do next. I think that kind of analytics carried out across agencies would make them all better off and test experimentation. So how to do it? Well, you go to a bar association meeting. If you went to the American Bar Association meeting, you go to the IBA and you put the poor public officials up there. What's one of the first things they say? We've been very busy. We've been extremely busy. We've been busy. You want to stand up from the crowd, and I say this to myself when I used to give this talk, and scream back at myself, I don't care if you've been very busy. Have you been very effective? What are you doing to improve your effectiveness over time? I had an athletic coach once who had a sign on the wall that said, never confuse activity with accomplishment. So we've been very busy. Well, have you been very effective? One element of building effectiveness is to know what's in your R&D budget to get smarter every year. How much is it? That's what we ought to be asking all the time. What's your R&D budget look like? Studies, building this kind of capability. And as a community, what we want is the willingness to make investments today that generate good results tomorrow. Don't tell us about picking the low-hanging fruit. Tell us about how many trees you planted. That's what we'd like to know over time about R&D. That's why I congratulate Stefan, Andrea, the board, the colleagues here at the CMA for making that aspiration a reality. Thank you. Colleagues for the first panel, please. Plenty of good seats. Okay, good. We have the opportunity now to speak with a number of agencies that are doing this and actually putting this program into effect and carrying out a lot of good work that's designed to put them collectively in a position to deal not just with the overall range of matters coming their way, but with everything involving big, difficult, and challenging tech and everything that goes with it. I'll introduce each as we start along, but with us on the stage here, Andrea Coscelli from the CMA. We've got Olivier Guersent from DG Comp, Benoît Cœuré from the Autorité, and online we have with us Lina from the FTC and Gina Cass-Gottlieb from the Australian ACCC. A wonderful selection of officials who I think have reflected in what their agencies do the importance of making the investments that make you better off in the future. And to kick off our discussion, we're going to have initial presentations by each of our colleagues. And to start us off, I'm going to ask our host, Andrea, if you can get us underway, please.
Great. Thanks, Bill, for the introduction, and thanks, Stefan, for putting together the conference, which looks very interesting. So let me just make a few points and some reflections on our journey. And Stefan wrote this grey paper, actually, that was published yesterday, which I would really recommend to people, because in a sense there's a lot of detail about what we have done and the things that work and things that work less. So we started in 2017 with a clear sense, I think, from me and from the board, and Bill and other board members have been very supportive, that we needed to up our game. We were really missing on a lot of the skills and knowledge that was on the other side. And it somehow, same way sort of economists managed to find their way into agencies certainly in Europe in the late 90s. There was certainly a need for technologies to do the same. And some of the lessons from the kind of introduction of economics from an agency point of view were quite relevant there. So we're lucky to appoint Stefan as the first head, and in many ways that really helped us, because obviously Stefan is an economist, also has a first degree in sort of experimental psychology. When he was at our financial services regulator, was running sort of big experiments with big data, so was already bringing in lots of new skills. And the idea was to be quite open at that point, because to be honest, we didn't know a huge amount. You know, we, probably similarly to a number of the law firms represented here, we have a very granular understanding of the legal and economic expertise available. You know, we have lots of internal expertise. If we need particular legal or economic expertise in very particular fields, we have a very good sense of who are the people who are the experts in that ecosystem. And we had none of that. So one of the first things I discussed with Stefan was very much to try to go out there and really start building this ecosystem, you know, understanding, you know, who are the academics who work in these particular areas, what are the career paths for their students, what are the possible areas of overlap between the policy side and the technology side in this space. And then we didn't really think about the particular areas or subfields. So if you read, when you read Stefan's paper, where we have ended up over the last 3-4 years is having a group of data scientists who obviously mainly work on big data. So it's big data on cases and big data internally. We have a group of data engineers who have been mainly involved in helping us with our own digital transformation, in making sure that our own processes, the pipes for us on casework and everything we do are more effective. Later on, we added this technology insight team, which is a bit more qualitative in nature. So it's not big data, but it's people who go to the conferences, read stuff, and understand how some of these key technologies are evolving. Because again, one of the key touch points for us, like for other agencies, is merger control. You know, we have a constant flow of complex mergers, sometimes in very new areas, and I think all of us, and you know, I see Lina on screen, I think she says she thinks that she's in the same place, that some of the mistakes we've all made over the last 10-15 years are because we didn't quite understand some of the technologies, some of the issues in some of these mergers that were allowed. So I think there is a sense of, you know, how do we do horizon scanning? How do we get more plugged in some of these new technologies, and how can we be more effective there? And then we added behavioral scientists, which again, I think is the area where Stefan initially was doing a lot of work. And this is an area that is more and more relevant. If I look at our current portfolio, if I look at the remedies, if I look at our digital cases, just understanding remedies, understanding you know, online choice architecture, and a number of our consumer protection cases are shaped more and more by behavioral scientists. But we decided to be quite open on that. You know, we didn't start with fixed proportions or different grades. It was more of a sense of trying to bring in the talent, trying to make sure that the talent was kind of fitting in with the rest of the organization. I think there's a big cultural piece in the sense that you need, as an organization, to be open to this kind of energy coming in, trying to fit it in with the rest of the skills. And I think the board has been very supportive, the rest of the leadership team in the CMA. Compared to others, I mean, the way we're set up, we have quite a lot of flexibility in the way we manage our budgets, so we can allocate money to particular activities. So that has helped doing that. I mean, one of the key questions for us going forward is if we get this powers of digital regulation in the DMU, as we hope and as the government has promised, the CMA will move from being a sort of a pure play competition authority to becoming a hybrid competition authority and regulator. And personally, I'm very comfortable with that. I think it makes a lot of sense. But I think culturally, the organization will have to change and take that role, which also means that you, as Bill was saying, you have a big portfolio of remedies, potentially a growing portfolio of remedies, and more of your work and your effectiveness is about those remedies actually working in practice in markets. We spent quite a lot of time thinking about career paths. I think that's still very much work in progress. So a number of the people who have come in don't see themselves for life as people who, worry about antitrust and regulation. They came in as specialists, and probably they thought, we're going to leave the CMA and do another job in the private sector as specialists. And there is a genuine question there about attraction and retention, and in many ways, something which is, again, very much work in progress. I think the same way economists became more and more influential in running agencies over the last 20 years, I think technologies have become more and more relevant in the policy discussions within agencies, in shaping the policies, and also in becoming part of the senior leadership of organizations. And that's not where we are today in the CMA, and that's something that I think my successor will have to think about, because I think it's self-evident that a lot of the priorities are shaped by a number of people in the senior leadership team, and their lived experiences and their skills have a big role in that. So I think that's an area that needs to change. Working with others is a big deal, as Bill was saying. I think we've been always very open. So we do a lot of work domestically. We've created this Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum. We have John here, who heads the ICO, and the Ofcom, which is the telecom and media regulator, and financial services regulator, work together with us. And for instance, quite a lot of the horizon scanning we're now increasingly doing through this forum, because again, there are massive overlaps and synergies. So for instance, the last few months, we did quite a lot of work on algorithmic auditing, which unsurprisingly was a key concern for all of us, looking at the different functions. And then the international piece is clearly very, very important. There are lots of touch points in the CMA. I think this conference is very much an example of that. Stefan has done a great job in, again, linking up with a lot of his counterparts globally, and this is going to become ever more important. And again, we are certainly interested in doing joint market studies with our counterparts internationally. We have discussed with some of the people in this panel. So there is more and more joined up work. I mean, obviously, there are legal barriers, and some of the issues are not immediately solvable, but I think there is a strong desire for that. So final couple of points in terms of what is on the agenda, what is work in progress. I'd say number one, litigation strategies, in the sense that more and more of these cases, our case work will be in the digital space. We'll use more and more technology input, big data, empirical analysis. Economics will be mixed much more with documents, data, and technology. And again, we need to have the right narrative and convince the courts is the right way of doing it. We had a judgment yesterday in our Meta-Giphy case, which in many ways was quite supportive of the work we did there, particularly on the substantive issues. So I think that's quite encouraging for us. Secondly, I think there's a big exercise for all of us in applying digital transformation to our agencies and our processes. I think that's obviously an issue for all companies, but I think probably we as public sector bodies are a bit behind the curve. So that's an area where I think we just need to think more and more about how we can automate processes and trying to get efficiencies out of it. And then the final point, as I said, I think this very much is work in progress about having technologists shaping more and more the policy choices and the priorities of the agencies by being more and more part of the senior leadership teams and the boards in structures like ours. So that's what I wanted to say by way of introduction. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks so much, Andrea, for getting us off to a great start and underscoring, among other things, that it's not just enough to bring in the individuals, but to integrate them in an effective way into the development of the program and apply them over time. Olivier.
Yeah, well, thanks. And thanks for your thought-provoking remarks. I mean, There's a lot of food for thought in what you said in introduction. I'd like to take the opportunity to congratulate, I think it's the right time to congratulate you, Andrea, for the achievements, in particular in this field. So you certainly have been busy. You definitely have been productive, and I hope by the metrics of Bill that you've been effective as well.
Thanks.
But that's only future tells in general. Well, I mean, to answer the question, I mean, I thought maybe you first need to look outside and then turn to inward looking. I mean, outside, of course, we have the big platforms, the DMA. I will not bore you with this, but tons of conferences on the issue. But I mean, that's a reality. The world is changing, and the challenges we face are changing as well. Even if, when you look at platform behavior, in the end of the day, if you peel the onion, at the core you find the very same old practices we always knew. I mean, they didn't invent leveraging, they didn't invent bundling, tying, and all these sort of things. But the challenge is to get to the core, really, and that's enough of a challenge in itself. And also, outside of the platform economy, I mean, digital is everywhere, and it changes the way market works everywhere. It's difficult for us to understand. And finance is an example Benoît and I know very well, where digital is very, very big and makes a very big transformation that impacts competition issues, like in payments, for example. That impacts also very trivial things, like how you make cartels. You make cartels on the internet. You get a private chat room on the dark web somewhere, so no need to book a hotel in the Bahamas and have discussions anymore. So all this needs for us to adapt. So now if I look on the inside, I mean, I think like CMA, we've started that journey a long time ago. When I was director for cartels, which is a bit more than 10 years ago, we started what we called the Forensic IT Lab, which was basically, it was the infancy in these days of more sophisticated ways of doing cartels. And we started the policy response. But of course, it's traditional. Well, first of all, administration have less financial means, staff means than private firms. And secondly, they always have a first mover advantage, of course. You're lagging behind, trying to catch up all the time. So we've been growing that over time. Today, to give you an idea, more than half of my budget is dedicated to this type of issues. I mean, it's digital, basically. And it will grow. And the other half, if I carve out staff expenses, of course, is studies and mission. But kind of 57% is digital. And so we invest a lot on it, and of course it will only go bigger with the DMA. So in 2016, we decided we should go bigger with this, so we created a full unit. And it proved very effective in assisting, it was the cartel directorate, in assisting cartel investigations. But very, very quickly, we realized that it became increasingly used by everything else but cartels, and in particular mergers. Because, of course, in merger, we tend to... I remember in the 90s we were making fun of the US when they had to rent a building to store the boxes because they were requesting so many documents. To be fair, today...
Read every one of them.
Yes. But to be fair, today, if we had to get the documents we request on paper, we would have to rent several buildings as well. So the question is, once you have requested all these documents, what do you do with them? And of course, you need to, your resources, staff resources are constrained, so you need to find smart ways to see patterns, to associate leads, facts. So we started to invest a lot in IA, basically, to do this, as other authorities are doing, as the colleagues, I'm sure Lina will mention, are doing in the US as well. So that's a journey. Of course, the DMA will change all of this, because with the DMA, we will need to grow much bigger in terms of, for example, the number of data scientists we have, the tools we have to deal with the flow of data we will receive. So that the game will change, and this is where, I mean, the only way to face it, in our view in the Commission, is a cooperative game. We will never have in comp enough data scientists to do all of this. So the first decision we took, Roberto Viola, who is my colleague running Connect, so he's in charge of the implementation of the DSR. We are jointly in charge of the DMA. We decided to pool our data scientists. We decided not to have a pool that does DMA and a pool that does DSA, because there is a lot of commonalities, and we want to be able to focus a big enough staff force on one single issue for a defined period of time if we need. So that's the first thing, but even that is not enough. And we need to pull further for two reasons, or two dimensions, actually. The first one is what we're talking about is at the crossroad of many things. Yes, it's competition, but yes, it's regulation, and yes, it's privacy, and yes, it's data regulation, and yes, well, it's many other things. It's consumer protection. We are only interested with competition in the antitrust sense of it. Some of the colleagues are antitrust with also consumer protection, and some with many other things. So the issue here is how do you manage to reconcile the various objectives while not distorting the implementation of your competition tool? Because if you do this, not only you don't do your job, but you likely will lose your case in court. So how do we pool resources, at the same time sort out the results so that each of us can do his part of the job? Will be, in my view, one of the fundamental issues in going forward in the digital transformation. The same goes that Benoît, who mentioned that in Berlin, between the national competition authorities and the Commission. I mean, of course we should pool resources as well, in particular to help the smallest jurisdictions to crack big cases or complex cases. It's ridiculous to have one data scientist in country A, two in country B. Of course, they will never have more, and we will never have more than what we have, but maybe we can help each other. And that we can only do if we are able to internalize early enough the constraint of transmission of information. How can I have somebody from France working in one of my cases or in a German case? It's not terribly complex, but if you don't foresee it in advance, you don't get the legal structure for this, and then you take legal risks going further. So we should think about that as well. So, and finally, maybe one thing is tech is so much present across the board, of course in DMA going forward, but in all fields of antitrust and mergers. We're seriously reflecting in the Commission, and I think in other authorities as well, to have what I would call a chief technology officer. I mean, somebody modeled on the chief economist that brings to the institutions kind of state-of-the-art knowledge from the outside on a temporary basis, but who is able to have this horizontal view and coordinate technology issue across the board.
Yeah, that's great, Olivier, and I think emphasizing, as you did, that it might not be necessary for every agency or even possible to establish this deep collection of expertise, but if you have a network that's effective, you can draw upon the network to provide what you need. And as you say, in the face of the complexity brought about by the multidisciplinary nature of the field, I mean, the conferences that I attend, when they talk about tech, say you don't simply need the data technologists or the lawyer or the economist. You need the anthropologists, the sociologists, the psychologists who understand what it's actually doing to the society, the way people live, the way in which they buy things, use things. And this, I think, suggests a wider range of collaboration, both across agencies and with institutions outside to get our arms around what's taking place. But thank you. Lina, if we can please turn to you. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all. Thanks, Bill, and thanks to the CMA for hosting this really timely and salient discussion. We at the FTC are grappling daily with questions around how we can be making these investments and updating our tools to make sure we're fully equipped to detect, analyze, and remedy unlawful conduct, especially in digital markets. And as Bill well knows, this embedded in the DNA of the FTC, and one reason why Congress created the agency was to make sure we had a set of experts that were fully able to keep pace with changing markets and technologies. And so this really goes to the heart of our mission and mandate. This is something that we've been very focused on. And there are a few key pillars to our approach. So first, we've been seeking to invest in our capacity to fully grasp and understand new and emerging technologies. Our talented lawyers and economists are no strangers to this. I'm constantly awed by their ability to be fully grasping arcane and highly specialized markets, especially in merger review. But as we've heard from many others, there's just an enormous amount to be gained by incorporating a greater set of analytical tools and skill sets into the agency's work, and to be fostering greater collaboration among these disciplines. So like many of our counterparts at the FTC, this has involved increasing our use of technologists alongside our skilled lawyers, economists, and investigators. We don't have the ability to just summon an increase in our budget. So for the most part, as of right now, we've been leaning heavily on details from other agencies, IPAs, creative ways to be increasing the number of technologists in the building while we're still waiting for Congress to increase our budget to fully equip us to invest in it. And we've been able to increase the number of technologists quite significantly, drawing from a diverse set of skill sets, including data scientists and engineers, user design experts, and AI researchers. And we're looking to continue building up this team. As we heard from Andrea, getting the right people in the building, of course, is only the first part of the challenge. There are core institutional and organizational design questions associated with how you fully integrate and deploy these skills. And even within the last year, it's been very clear how important it is to be fully embedding those technologists within our investigative teams and having them be involved from the get-go to fully be able to shape the trajectory of the investigation rather than just be brought in at a later stage where the train has left the station. In addition to direct case support, our technologists have also been helping identify potential concerns around emerging technologies and do some of the horizon scanning work. So one area where this has come up is staff across the agency are confronting, for example, virtual reality and augmented reality technologies. This is something that's coming up in the context of our merger review and our merger investigations. It's also coming up in the context of our consumer protection work. And so having our technologists on board and able to pull together resource and expertise and programming to be able to inform this work across the agency has been a really good model of this, and something we're looking to replicate and build on across other key technologies and innovations. A second pillar of what we've been looking to do is using this talent as part of our investments and upgrades in our tools and frameworks. So we have an ongoing review of our merger guidelines to make sure that in part we're capturing the realities of how firms are using mergers to acquire and maintain market power, especially in digital markets, and to really correct for some of the assumptions that had suggested, for example, that the intrinsic dynamism of digital markets weighed in favor of under-intervention, and making sure we're fully incorporating all of the learning around network externalities, the way in which markets can tip, the self-reinforcing advantages of data, incorporating into how we're putting together this enforcement manual. We're also in the midst of revision of the merger notification form. So this basically identifies what information we're receiving on the front end when parties are making their filings, and identifying, are we even receiving it in formats that maximally equip us to make best use of the information. So there's a component of this revision that's based on identifying the information that's needed for the legal analysis, but there's also a technological component to make sure we're receiving it in formats that equip us to make use of it in the most effective and efficient way. We've also had our technologists involved in crafting and updating model CIDs, updating these types of CIDs to make sure that we're capturing changes in how firms are storing and exchanging information. So as people are, migrating not just to chat, but other types of information storage in the cloud to make sure that when we're collecting information as part of our investigations, that we're fully able to capture it and then actually make use of it. And lastly, they've been also involved in helping us put together a remedies toolkit. So the technologists have been working closely with the staff attorneys to create a digital remedies toolkit, for example, for certain types of consumer protection and privacy and data security violations, to make sure that our remedies are technologically sound, but also that they're fully depriving the lawbreaker of the fruits of the unlawful conduct, as well as prescribing best practices. And some of the settlements that we've been able to move forward with over the last few months have really reflected, for example, the state of the art in data security practices to make sure that what we're prescribing is really keeping pace with the latest set of learnings in the market. Third, we're taking an interdisciplinary approach and really investing in our research capacities. So in as much as we have, competition, consumer protection, and privacy, making sure that we're making full use of each of those lenses when assessing and analyzing conduct. We also, of course, have 6B of the FTC Act, which Congress gave the agency to be able to conduct sweeping market inquiries. There were two major 6B inquiries that were initiated under my predecessor in the context of digital markets. So one was an inquiry into non-reportable acquisitions by the nation's 5 largest technology companies. Last fall, we were able to issue a preliminary report that showed some of the findings and helped us identify both the specific markets where these tech firms were most acquisitive in ways that was falling below our radar, as well as identifying for us, are there potential tweaks that we could be making, for example, to the reporting requirements that would let us capture a greater set of these acquisitions. There was another 6B that was initiated, very sweeping 6B, looking at social media practices and video streaming practices more broadly. So that's an inquiry that's ongoing where we're still digesting the information and data and figuring out how best to make use of it. We're looking to also identify additional areas where we think there are key information asymmetries or blind spots where our use of 6B could really help mitigate some of that. And lastly, we've been building our relationships and investing in collaboration. So this is, within the U.S. with other agencies. The Biden administration has put a lot of emphasis on what they call a whole of government approach to competition policy. We're taking that spirit and applying it across our work. So especially with other agencies that also have deep technological expertise and skill sets, such as the Department of Homeland Security, that's oftentimes on the front lines, for example, of cybersecurity breaches, deepening our relationships and partnerships with them so that we can be in closer contact when there are certain incidents and have a more cohesive public response, but also invest in the type of information sharing that can really further empower the FTC. And of course, our international relationships have been really critical here. In particular, the CMA and Andrea and Stefan have been so generous with their time and expertise as our teams are really figuring out how we can be learning from their experience and their ability in a relatively short period of time to really develop such a sophisticated operation. But this really applies across the board. We've really been prioritizing our engagement with international counterparts to make sure that in as much as we have these shared goals, we can be facilitating learning across the board and best practices. So I'll leave it there, but thanks again for hosting this really important discussion. And I've already learned a ton and look forward to hearing from the others.
Thanks, Lina. One thing among the many impressive points you make that I'm grateful for is how you link what's happening with digital to a larger reexamination by agencies of everything they do in some ways. That is, how their different capabilities, their different features of their mandate, their individual policy tools can be integrated in a way that provides a better result. If you assume that legislators are not going to step forward and say, how much more money would you like? Instead, they're going to look and say, keep up the good work and do more with what you have. There's an urgency to take what you've already got and make better use of it. That is to focus on this crucial dimension of policy implementation and do better. And everything you mentioned on your agenda, Lina, is pointed in the direction of thinking about how to do that until the day comes when that great, famous, infinite body of resources comes our way. Benoît.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for the thoughtful comments you shared earlier in the discussion. And thank you very much to Andrea, to Stefan, and to the CMA team for putting this conference together in beautiful London. I mean, you can see on screen how beautiful the weather is outside in London, but it's a beautiful day. Maybe what could be helpful for the discussion would be for me to share a few thoughts I've collected over the first 4 months I've been in office. And which can be relevant to today's discussion. And I would like to start from a slightly different angle, which is more about the instruments, the enforcement instruments that we have to address digital cases. And then I come back to resources and skills, which have been very much in the focus already. And starting with the instruments, I think what I've seen so far is that we've really benefited a lot from being from availing from a broad set of instruments, from a broad and deep and broad toolbox, and that's about fines, of course, and commitments, also about interim measures, which we've been using increasingly to address digital cases, and maybe eventually also structural injunctions, structural orders, which of course are also part of the toolbox. And what I've seen so far is that first, there are instruments that can help us to act very quickly, which is even more important in digital cases and in general, and that's in particular about interim measures, which we've been able to use, for instance, to order incumbents in the energy sector to share data with their competitors, or also in the Google case with publishers, which is close to the bargaining code, which Gina knows very well. It's a similar set of issues, where we've been able to order Google to negotiate in good faith with publishers, including by sharing data which is relevant to the valuation of copyright, which they weren't doing. And so that has been very useful, but it's often a combination of instruments, actually. So coming back to the Google case, I mean, initially we used interim measures, and then it just happens that Google did not comply with interim measures, so we had to fine Google 500 million. And then then the discussion started. So it's a little bit like this, this Teddy Roosevelt quote, speak softly and carry a big stick, right? So you need both types of instruments, and that has been the lesson. But the lesson also, and here I'm going to get slightly more controversial, is that sometimes you need to know how to use the instruments, sometimes you also need to know how not to use the instruments. And you need to delineate very carefully what belongs to competition law and policy and action, and what belongs to other fields of regulation. And I think privacy is really a case in point, where that could be it's an entirely it's a very important discussion on its own. But to put it simply, we know that there are key complementarities and there are key area of alignment between competition and privacy. But we also know that there can be trade-offs, and there are different perspectives. And I think that on privacy, as on other matters, we should resist what I would call the competition hubris, which is to try to solve everything with competition instruments. Competition tools can be very powerful. Maybe they're not powerful enough. So I know that many people around think that we should be bolder and we should act earlier and more swiftly, etc. And that might all be true. But compared to other regulatory fields, competition tools are more can be more powerful, particularly in terms of the magnitude of fines, for instance. And so we should not be shy in using these instruments. When we use them, we should use them swiftly and boldly. I agree with that. But sometimes it doesn't provide for a long-lasting solution, for a steady-state solution. So if I come back again to this Google and publishing rights issue, we've acted, and we'll soon, within a few weeks, if not days, we'll release our decision on this case, and whether we are happy or not with Google's commitments. But I don't think that regulating copyrights belongs to the core remit of a competition authority. So that might be my only dissent with Andrea. I mean, I agree with 98% of what Andrea said, but I'm not very keen to become a regulator, honestly. I don't think that, I don't want to start regulating copyrights, press copyrights. I think that there are other places. Yeah, I mean, I'm currently doing it somehow, but at some point I will hand it over to the government and tell them, look, that's how far we've been, and please pass it into law and make it something that can be permanent. I don't think that we can do that. So what I'm saying here is that we should also be aware of the limits of what we are doing, and that society can have different priorities. If you're coming back to privacy, for instance, which is a key issue we've got to deal with when dealing with digital and with data, society can have different priorities. And yes, our instruments are probably more powerful than any instrument that a privacy or a data protection authority can avail of. But at some point, if this goes to appeal courts, if this goes to the European Court of Justice, if this becomes a political discussion, privacy will prevail because it's a fundamental right, which competition is not. And so you've got to be aware also of the broader societal priorities and be at some point humble in what you want to achieve and what you don't want to achieve. So that was my kind of first set of comments on the instruments. Now coming back to the discussion on skills and capability, I agree with a lot of what has been said. I agree that it's a duty for us to shape up and to strengthen our capability. In our case, our capability is still in the making, I would say. We have a wonderful digital economy unit led by Jan Gutmann, who's here today, and he will be on the concluding panel tonight. And they've been doing fantastic work, but there are 5, right? It's five of them. And then we have excellent specialists of various aspects of the digital economy elsewhere in the authority. But and I'm sure at some point I will go to Parliament and ask for more. But that's never going to be enough. So we also need to pool resources. As Olivier said, we need to pool resources better in the European system across national competition authorities and with the Commission. So having at some point some kind of data hub or innovation hub or competition hub that would kind of pool resources and provide resources to all competition agencies, in my view, would make sense, and it's perfectly legal under European law to do that. It would be more difficult at a global level, but at a European level, we have the legal basis to do it. And we also need to pool resources better with other agencies. We are doing it with the government, by the way. Occasionally, we are tapping resources from the Ministry of Economy in Paris. And legally, we can appoint these guys as external case handlers. So they can be part of the full process for a limited period of time. And that helps us to really tap the right resources in terms of data science. It's more than data science, it's more than technology. Fundamentally, I think what's missing is the capability for us to scan the horizon, as Andrea said earlier, and to understand business models better, which is something that bureaucrats don't do very well, to be honest, usually. Because if you want to understand what companies are up to, you need a minimum commonality of minds. You need to be on the same. You need a minimum commonality of mindsets, right? Which we don't have because we are fundamentally bureaucrats, right? So I've been part of that kind of exercise in my previous job at the Bank for International Settlement, where we had created this innovation hub, and a lot of the effort was not about the technology itself. It was about the mindset. It was about trying to understand how people can work in an agile environment, how they can ideate new projects, how they can fail forward, which is very much not what central bankers do, right? And so we have a little bit the same kind of issues here, that we have to import that mindset in our own institutions, and that's, in my view, the most difficult part of it. Maybe one last remark, which is related, is I think the distinction between the digital economy and the non-digital economy is entirely artificial, because digital is everywhere. It kind of permeates all industries now, retail, TV. I mean, everything is getting digital. So we still have a few non-digital cases. We had a wonderful case earlier this year about how cats and dogs are being shipped from Europe to Polynesia. That's a fantastic case for an enforcer to look into. But most other cases are partly or entirely digital. So you need to understand how the business model will change throughout the economy, and you need the right set of instruments and legal framework to do it. And that's really difficult, because you're caught between a rock and a hard place. Either you look back and at how companies have been doing things, which is a little bit what the DMA does. With all due respect, the DMA is a little bit like, at a given point in time, we make sense of everything we've been doing over the last 15 years, and we kind of crystallize everything in a text, and it will help us streamline processes looking forward. And it's great, and it's going to be very useful. But if you think of how data now is being used in the car industry or in the healthcare industry, we don't know what the business models will be. We know what the business model is in online advertising, because we have all this story of case decisions which we could encapsulate into the DMA, and that has been very useful. But I don't know yet how car makers will use data. I don't know whether it will be like vertical integration around different car makers, or whether there will be some kind of standard, some kind of Android of cars that will emerge, and whether car will look like big iPhones with a common standard to handle data. I just don't know, and that's life. But we have to prepare for it. And in that sense, I'm a little bit more worried about the Data Act in Europe than about the DMA, because the Data Act is about regulating business models that haven't emerged yet, and so you need a lot of capability to project yourself and to understand what the business is up to, and that's really where we should be investing.
Yeah, that's great, Benoît. I think you underscore too that there are a variety of places you can look to get the capabilities. That is the challenge. How do you understand what's going on in a meaningful way? But you can grow it organically inside. We've been talking about that. You can build partnerships with other public institutions to do this. I think in many ways, academic hubs can provide a source of partnership too. I mean, I think of the academic powerhouses in France. I mean, the team in Toulouse, just to pick one, but a regulatory hub like Paris Dauphine. I mean, there's so many resources that can be drawn in there too to perform this frightfully difficult task. I should have mentioned before that we have a range of experiences here. Andrea's been doing this a little bit longer. Olivier, a little bit in between, but so many years in comp. Benoît, relatively near to this. Happy first anniversary, Lina. I think this is year one of Chair Khan's term, June 15th, and we turn to another recent addition to the community, and that's Gina, whose work already has been mentioned by our colleagues. Gina, could you take it from here, please?
Thanks very much, Bill, and thanks for the challenges really you threw out to us. And also to Andrea and Stefan for including the ACCC, including Jane Lynn, who heads our unit, who is there with you in London, and other members of our team. Our ACCC Strategic Data Analysis Unit was established in 2017 with an initial focus of supporting market inquiries. It grew to include merger assessments, then to embrace consumer and competition investigations and enforcement cases. The team gradually recruited statisticians, data scientists from other agencies, as well as computer science and mathematics graduates joining our behavioural economists as well at the ACCC. In 2021, the unit combined with our info centre, which receives over 350,000 complaints every year, our intelligence team and the legal technology unit to form a united data and intelligence branch, which today has approximately 85 staff members. When we look at the work that the branch is doing, I think, Bill, I can show how it is improving the effectiveness of our role across each of our functions: competition, consumer, infrastructure, regulatory, and market studies. And I'd look at that, looking at the work in three categories, emphasising the link between the data analysis that they are doing and better decision-making. Our decision-making both strategically in helping to set our priorities, our decision-making operationally, how we can work better, and our tactical decisions on specific cases and projects. To give one example, in our strategic work, our D&I branch have several projects underway that seek to build capability for proactive detection of emerging competition and consumer issues. One is a search tool we're calling Trader 360 that brings together data from a range of sources coming into the agency to provide a comprehensive profile of a trader. It's like looking at the usual suspects and its interactions with the agency. Next, we're looking to extend the functionality of Trader 360 to include risk ratings and to build a similar tool for reporting on emerging product safety issues. I'm moving to the tactical contributions, which are very significant. So the team firstly identifies the data sources, both within the agency and externally relevant to the claims and hypotheses of harm, defines terms relating to data and algorithms in our information gathering notices, analyses data to surface the patterns and trends that you were describing before, Bill, which are essential so that we can actually understand what's going on, analysing algorithms, including machine learning algorithms, and explaining how they work, and very importantly, including when we get to court, translating technical jargon for non-technical audiences. I want to take two examples. The first is an enforcement case and the second is a mergers case. So the first is an investigation commenced in 2017 against Trivago, an online tourism comparison website, which misleadingly represented that it was displaying offers on its website in response to searches that displayed the cheapest offers for the relevant hotel rooms. The team assisted first in the investigation, but then in court to succeed for the court to make the finding on liability, because the analysis that was done on the information and the source code comprising the algorithms established that the algorithm weighted the commission paid to Trivago by booking sites and the choice of offers more highly than the level of the price that the consumer would pay for the hotel room. In addition, the SDAU helped the case team quantify the benefit extracted by Trivago and the harm suffered by consumers so that we could put compelling penalty propositions to the court. This was in addition to giving data-related advice relevant to pleadings, discovery and expert witnesses. We succeeded in that case in the court. The second is in relation to a merger case. This was a case between toll road concession owners, the acquirer holding interests in 15 of the 19 toll road concessions in Australia, but on a standard analysis, none covered similar areas point to point. So we didn't have a direct competitive overlap. But what the SDAU team analysis showed by analysing Transurban's traffic modelling central to calculating its expected revenue and hence bid price was it showed the data held exclusively by Transurban as a result of operating other toll roads, which was used in that modelling. So as part of the data capacity that was fundamental to its business and competitive position. While the Commission didn't oppose the proposed acquisition, it did subject the transaction to a remedy requiring the acquirer to publish certain traffic data publicly for use by future rivals, which was informed by that analysis. Looking at the overall approach and to the key question you asked, how are we going to learn from what the mistakes we made, improve our effectiveness into the future? I think the key part is to foster the capacity of our team to be adaptable and to change. We have sought to include multidisciplinary teams, building upon the people we brought in from outside, joining those who are already within the agency, who are skilled and empowered to take creative approaches to solving problems. We're seeking to diversify our workforce, to value different specialty expertise, and to ensure that our people have access to ongoing development opportunities, such as attending this conference. We're also trying to seize upon the opportunities as well as the challenges as we expand our monitoring capabilities, and we are almost every day being given a new monitoring role by our government under pressure, cost of living, energy prices, petrol prices, etc. We're seeking to refine methods with the data that we gather to detect structural and behavioural anomalies, to increase the likelihood of detecting new issues as they emerge. As we grow in the data we gather, we're seeking to grow in our capacity to understand it and what it is telling us, to improve our proactive detection capacity as a strategic capability. And we are looking forward to our representatives at the conference to hear how other agencies are investing in this area. Finally, looking to this, which is a great example of interagency collaboration, we collaborate with domestic agencies. We're working currently on a plan with the financial services regulators in Australia to gather data on debanking, to look at the circumstances in which debanking is occurring and its impact, particularly upon new models of business and new competitors, and where they are being denied the services from basic banking services. We also have internationally strong ties with many of the agencies at this conference, including direct liaison between our respective data teams. We're envisaging that over time, we're not only going to share methodologies and information, but also our self-generated code, and are starting to have some examples of that with the CMA. And we would also welcome opportunities to work collaboratively on interjurisdictional investigations. We agree with the comment that each of the members of this panel have made, that by coordinating our efforts, we can increase our collective capability to identify and respond to the emerging issues, and particularly the significant pace of change that we're all facing. Thanks very much, Bill.
Thank you, Gina. And so true your observation about the again, the remarkable challenge that comes at the agencies from having some of these new functions, such as monitoring. How do you monitor effectively? Where governments expect agencies, a paradox, for example, of effective agencies, and I think we have them here, we have them on the screen too, is that the better you are at what you do, you get more people asking you to do things. And not with more resources to do it, but just do more. And this involves monitoring, solving climate change, bringing petrol prices down, doing all these things at one time. And how do you get your arms around the information that's required to do a good monitoring project? Again, here I look at the CMA experience, and I'm so struck at during COVID what a wonderful job Stefan and his colleagues did in simply getting an idea of what was going on and being a resource for government on that. I have a couple of questions here, and I thought I'd boil them down to a single query for our panel before we close at the bottom of the hour, and maybe your short thoughts on this. If you look ahead at where you would like to see the technological analysis capability of the agency be and how it's being used over time, where would you like to see your agency 5 years hence? What would you like to see it being able to do? Andrea, if I could come back to you.
Yeah, so I think it would be a pretty radical restructuring of the agency in the sense that a lot of the problems you would apply immediately a sort of digital tech lens to them as well, yes. not exclusively the kind of legal and economic lens we apply now. So I think there are So for instance, the monitoring point, if we get a letter today from the government asking us to do monitoring in a particular sector, to be honest, the CMA today will react with the kind of economic analysis from 10, 15 years ago in terms of the monitoring. I'm sure there are people with big data who have smart ideas of how to do it in a more effective way, but they are not in the, maybe Stefan, some of the people here have, but I think there are lots of things that are helpful to us that are out there that we're not quite using or absorbing today. And I think we've done quite a lot, but I think this is an area where probably one needs to be more radical than we've been so far.
Thank you. Olivier, a quick thought about where you'd like to be 5 years from now.
Well, very quickly, what I would hope is that we manage in 5 years to travel the same journey in terms of incorporating data scientists and all sorts of different profile as the one we've been doing over almost 20 years in incorporating more economists in order to reach really a better blend of skills and competencies.
Yeah. Lina.
I would echo much of that. I think having technologists be an institutionally embedded skill set, similar to the way that economists are at the agency, I think would be a big step forward, and having that as a readily available lens through which we do all of our work, I think is an aspiration.
Great. Benoît?
Well, it's very simple, and it's good that you picked 5 years, because that's exactly my term at the authority. So it sounds like a good horizon for me. It's a very simple answer. It's when in 5 years, when a new antitrust case or a new merger review comes, I want to be able to say, look, we've looked into it 1 year ago or 2 years ago, and not 10 years ago. And we had this sectoral study, or we had this report 1 year ago, and we're able to say today, when it comes to online advertising, we'll be able to do it when it comes to the cloud industry, because we are doing it now. We haven't done it for health data or car data, and there will be new issues coming over the next 5 years. So I just want to be able to say that.
That'd be a great answer. Gina.
I'd like, in a very similar fashion, to be able to look back confidently as to what we've learned, but also much more proactively to look forward. We are attempting to build these skills in a pipeline sense. For instance, to look at the extent to which we can use social media data to identify emerging issues. However, we are still, as I know many people in this conference will be talking to, we are still seeking to look at how predictively we can use the data that we have. And I would hope in 5 years, which also happens, like Benoît, to be my term, that we will have been able to have established a number of projects which give us confidence in being able to use the data in a predictive way.
I want to thank all of you for giving us, I think, what strikes me as a very sanguine view of public administration. Innovative, creative, experimental, thoughtful, forward-looking. And if you had any doubt about whether government agencies in our field are looking ahead in a way that is very, very helpful and, I think, encouraging, you heard it today. Please join me in thanking our panelists.
Thank you very much. We've now got a short coffee break, so look forward to seeing you in a bit over 20 minutes. Thanks.
See, it was just in time. So.